My name's Dave and I run Key Permaculture and Constructions. I'm a carpenter and a builder by trade, and I get very, very excited about fruit trees and getting fruit off the trees. And unfortunately, possums, rabbits, birds, cock, everything else gets just as excited as I do about the fruit. So we need to form some type of protection to keep the birds off. And that's what I'm here today to talk about. What we're going to cover today is we're going to talk about white netting versus black netting. What's the difference between the two? Is there actually a difference? Which there is. Then we're also going to be talking about how to put the netting on so that it isn't an issue for wildlife, because the last thing we want to do is save all our fruit and be catching bats and birds and snakes and injuring all this wildlife, because Wildlife Victoria gets over 1,000 injured animals a year, and that's just what they receive. That doesn't count all the other animals that are actually killed and injured in bird netting. So it's about making sure that the netting is used correctly to save your fruit, but also to save the wildlife so that they can't get it, but they're not getting hurt trying to get it. So what we'll start out with is a very common misconception, that is you can only use white netting. White netting is the only one available in the big green shed, because for some reason bats who actually use ultrasound to see, not visual, like to look at the white netting and can see it as a hazard. Me, on the other hand, I use black netting. And the reason I use black netting is highlighted very much by my structure behind here. You see through it. You put it up, you pull it tight, and it disappears. It does not become a visual eyesore. It does not become this big white thing that's in your backyard, because we want to see the fruit inside, the trees. You want to be seeing through it, looking in the background. You don't want to be sitting in there looking at this obstruction. That is what happens with white net. Now, they both nettings, black and white netting, both shade approximately 10% on the inside, so that when they're stretched out and on a structure and taut, you have some shading inside. Now, that's actually not an issue for us, because with our lovely, incredibly warm sun that we have, in summer, a small percentage of shading actually helps. So unless you're a commercial grower and you have invested a very large amount of money into the science behind the exact color of your netting, for backyard growers and 90%, 99% of us, it makes no difference whether you actually use black or white in terms of the fruit and how it ripens and when it ripens. Now, then we come on to the actual construction of the net themselves. I'm going to pass around these two bits of netting here, and these are offcuts that I've used to build the one that's over here. They all look exactly the same as this, but what I'd like to do is demonstrate. This here is a $70 net from the green shed that's sold as anti-bird net, and what it actually is it's called vine netting or drape netting. And that's how easily it tears. That's how easily the netting tears. You put your fingers in there and it just rips. Have a look at the netting that I'm passing around now. If you feel keen, try to give it a tear. This here is a 30 grams per square meter netting, and is veggie netting, vine netting, or drape netting. The commercial stuff that I have there is a 50 grams per square meter. It's a commercial structural net. So while you can tear that, it takes a lot more effort and it's a lot stronger net. So even if you weren't to go and put a structure in to cover the trees, you drape this net here over the trees and you try to pull it off at the end, of the season, when all your branches are growing through there, and you have all that lovely growth, and what you're going to end up with is all these holes in it. And if you're lucky, you can salvage enough net to then use it next year. If you then take the commercial netting that I have there and you drape it over the tree, you may get 5 or 6 seasons. Because it's heavier duty, you can repair it, and it is less prone to tearing, but you still only get 5, maybe 6 seasons out of it before it becomes so unusable it then has to be thrown away. It is recyclable. It's a halide density polyethylene, so it is a recyclable product, but 5 years, 1 year, you're still throwing away a lot of netting. If you take the same netting that lasts 5, maybe 6 seasons and put it on the structure, 15 to 20 years in the air. There's no dragging the net on each year, no dragging it off, no interesting conversations when you're trying to drag it off because it's getting caught and someone hasn't done the right job, and you're going, why didn't you grab that while we were pulling it off? And you're having these lovely arguments about whose fault it is on why the damn netting keeps on bloody catching on every bloody branch, which is fine for a year or two, but then it gets very, very, very frustrating. So what the solution for that now is evolved up is a permanent structure with a net over the top of it. And the main style that's used currently commercially is they take a timber pole, they put it in the ground, make it stay, then they run cables on it. And I don't know if any of you have seen the commercial orchards that are done like that. They generally have acres and acres under net. And look, it works. And it works in a commercial situation because they have lots of room, they have lots of money, and they are willing to invest into a very large structure. The biggest problem with the commercial structures is they are reliant on the tension of the cable to stop that pole falling over. Because as soon as you put any tension on it, it wants to pull out of the ground, it wants to bend, it wants to flex. So you have to use a very large pole, put in the ground a very long way, to try and stop any movement. Whereas what's now evolved is a freestanding structure using greenhouse hoops. So they can either be 7 meters wide or 10 meters wide. And because they are all self-supporting, you can use a very small, quite light treated pine pole. It goes in the ground. It has its treatment to last 20 plus years in the ground. Cut off the suit with a nice little cap on it to stop the net catching. And then suddenly you're not having ground anchors in the ground, which are a trip hazard. You're not spending money trying to make a pole that doesn't want to stay upright because it has tension on it. You're not trying to then just spend all this effort to try and keep it where it wants to be. So with the freestanding structure, it gets put up, it's stable, it doesn't move. Even with this wind today, there is 0 wind loading on the structure with net on it because the wind just blows straight through it. On the big flat commercial structures, they are like a giant sail and they wave up and down, and they then put additional tension on all the infrastructure, which then means it needs to be engineered to be stronger, and then it'll cost more money. Then, if you take same set netting that we're talking about and it's pulled over the top, and you go, this is a great idea. Let's drag this all the way down on the ground and keep all the animals out, because we needed it to the ground to keep them all out. What then happens is Mr. Ratius or Mr. Possumus or even Mr. Snake comes along and just goes straight through the net. Because it's on the ground, anything can come along, sit there, nibble on it, chew straight through, and then you're through. And then all that effort you've gone through to pull the net down, make it all nice and tight, make it all nice and tidy is wasted. Because you come along and there's a hole there. Once there's a hole there, everything comes through. So what you then need to look at doing is stopping things chewing through. So this here is a 40 millimeter or 4 centimeter chicken wire, and this size hole here lets through maybe a couple of little wrens, maybe some of those tiny little birds, but all the birds that get in aren't the cockies, aren't the rosellas, aren't the lorikeets that just strip fruit off for the hell of it because they're bored, or they just want to have whatever reason they do, they just want to break off the fruit and drop it on the ground before it's ripe. So you put the chicken wire on the side there, and you then have your bird netting, and this is demonstrated on the side there. You have the bird netting coming down and having a junction off the ground so that any creature that comes along, be it wombats, rabbits, possums, foxes, kangaroos, deers, anything comes along, isn't just going straight through a net, hurting themselves and damaging your infrastructure. Then, if you want to keep this nice and secure, you lay the chicken wire out on the ground with an apron, and as smart as Mr. Fox is, he comes along, hits the fence and says, oh, let's dig underneath there. He goes straight down and hits wire. And now, this isn't buried, this is laid on the ground and pinned out because, first of all, I'm lazy and I don't like digging. It's hard work, it costs money, and it's a waste of time, because if it's laid on the ground and not buried, the grass grows through it, you can't see it, and what you've also then done is you avoid it having an edge between the earth and the air, which is then a very reactive spot. So, and that would be where, right on the bottom here, is where it would rust out in a couple of years, even though this is good quality Australian-made Waratah wire, which is the premium wire you can get. It would still only last 5 or 6 years before you get it rusting out along that ground level, and therefore all that effort you've gone to bury it is wasted. The current age of the longest structure that has this out on the ground is 9 years, and there has still been zero entry of foxes, rabbits, wombats, kangaroos. So 9 years without any hassles, and there's been not a single break-in via that, and you can know that because there's hundreds of dollars, tens of thousands of dollars worth of animals inside that would be taken by the foxes. Yes? Yes? The question was about if, in this case it was mice or birds, if they are actively hunted and killed and then left out for the other animals to see, would they be avoided? My answer is I don't know. I have heard of it, but what that does bring me across to, because I'm not a fan of killing birds and killing animals, I mean, I will trap and poison pests if needed and they poison a problem. This generally helps to avoid most of those issues, but you brought up one about mice and rats, and unfortunately this wire here doesn't stop rats. This wire here, I'll pass some around because I've had some samples. This here is the only wire that I know of that will actually keep out rats. Unfortunately though, it is very expensive, very, very hard to work with, and it is only in a case of it may keep the rats out. So they can't get through it, but they work their way around it. So I'm currently doing an experiment at home to try and keep my 100+ tomato plants and my entire veggie garden safe from rats. The current bill for that is sitting at $6,000 to cover a 7 metre wide by 15 metre area, and I can't even guarantee that it's going to work. So in terms of mice and rats, you can try to keep them out, but your best method is to actually avoid getting them in the first place. So look, doing hygiene. Look, if you have chickens and ducks and animals, keeping the food away. Even cats and dogs, putting their food away at night, so there's no food for them. Also then, maybe some active trapping. If you don't have pets, you can use some poison. If you do have to use poison, make sure you use one that doesn't do secondary poisoning, so that it then doesn't, the mouse or the rat then doesn't die and then poison an owl that comes down and eats it, for instance. Or the other thing is, what you have is all your fruit trees under net in a beautiful secure area. Nothing can get in, nothing can get out. So therefore you can then integrate inside your fruit trees a cat or 2 cats. So suddenly you're meeting council regulations on containing the feline on your property, or a dog. You're getting fruit. They're being contained and safe and secure from either roaming, being attacked by other cats, being attacked by other dogs. And they're then doing the additional function of looking after your rat problem. While they might not completely solve it, they are going to be there as a deterrent too. So while poisoning and trapping is great, the next lot of rats just come straight in to fill that void. Whereas if you have an active management system in place in terms of a cat or something like that, it then is an ongoing maintenance issue that you don't need to worry about. Because cat's killing a couple of rats, suddenly the rats go, well, this area here, we know that we can go in there, but we're going to get eaten. We might as well not go in there because we know that whole area is secured by a cat. So that's where trying to fully exclude things like rats is, it may be possible, and I'm trying it, but it is ridiculously expensive and comes with zero guarantees, because they are going to try and they're going to test and they're going to chew and they're going to do everything they can to get in there to get your harvest. So I say, bang for your buck, it's worth either losing a little bit to rats or putting in some sort of management system, be it traps, baits, or a cat, to then maintain that system and keep it from becoming a problem. Because if you do find it, you need to get on top of it quickly, or else it can become a big issue and you will lose everything. So another option, now one that I don't have experience with where I am in the Dandenong Ranges where I'm based, is I don't have an issue with fruit fly, but there is fruit fly issues around. Some in Melbourne, they're getting around and they're doing horrendously horrible things, but this netting here is fruit fly netting. And while you could try and net an entire orchard in fruit fly netting, if you had a structure up to keep all the main animals out, you could then individually net susceptible trees, as well as doing all the maintenance issues you need to look after fruit fly. So there's another sample here of different types of net. But to give a, because I wasn't able to bring a rather huge structure along to demonstrate what I build, this here is a model of what the style structures I build. And what's really elegant about using something like a greenhouse hoop is this span here is a scale 10 metre span. So there's 10 metres across and this is 20 metres long. It's built to scale. And this here is rather light duty steel. That's only meant to be a model. But what's brilliant about when you roll a piece of steel and you get this beautiful clear span is it's incredibly strong. This is, if I was to stand on a flat piece of steel, it would bend. I could not stand on here, I could not point load on here a huge amount of weight without it failing. The other thing is with this design here, if I loosen off 2 screws on the end here with these braces, the whole thing will collapse. So there's a little bit of design in there to make sure that this whole structure is freestanding, so that if you're on a slope and it's on an angle like that, You can have shorter poles down that end, longer poles on this end, and the whole thing sits relatively flat. And you can then work out, we might only have 1.5 meters here, but that's then enough to say put a dwarf apple in, or an Australian. So then you can work in, once you have a space secure, you can then look at what can I put in there to get maximum use out of a short space, maximum use out of a tall space, and then what's actually going to like being, say, getting the afternoon sun. I know I don't like the afternoon sun, but there's a lot of trees that do. There's also a lot of trees that like the morning sun, like apricots that need to dry out to stop getting fungal and leaf curl. So they can go in an area that gets morning sun. So you can then look at these things once you have an area that's secure. Because if you're going to put all the trees in, you're going to have all this expense, expectation, and desire to get fruit. If it's not covered, it isn't going to happen. And it's just about making sure that it's covered right, so that you're getting the stuff, but also you're not hurting and damaging the wildlife while you try and get that, while you're trying to get that yield. That's taken about 20 minutes quicker than I'd expected. That was meant to go for an hour. Now, what I'll do is I'll open up some questions, because that will go. You know, the question was about the size of netting. Now, Wildlife Victoria says it has to be wildlife friendly netting. It has to be something like this, which is a less than 5 millimeter diameter hole, so that the bats and the birds and everything else can't get tangled in it. This keeps out fruit flies. This also keeps out all your bees for pollination. So I do understand that, and while that may be a issue if you are taking one set net here and draping it over a tree nice and loose like this, and it's all horribly loose and there's just hazards there for all the animals, yes, you're going to need a smaller size net. If you go have a look at the structure over there when we're done, on the sides the net is pulled so taut and tensioned, there is no way that an animal can get trapped in it. The netting over there is a 15 millimeter net. I have a sample here of a heavy duty 20 mil net. Both of them have zero issues with pollination. The bees and the flies and everything else that do pollination get through these with no problems at all. So yes, the recommendation is for a small gauge net, but they also recommend putting it over a structure to keep the net taut. So it's looking at that going, well, and this stuff is nearly double the price of even the expensive stuff here. So a square meter price, it's nearly double the price. So it can get very expensive, which actually, now this net here, it was a 4 meter long and a 4 meter wide net. But when you have it laid out in the ground, so this is, if you're buying net by the meter, when this is laid out in the ground, this is actually going to be 4 meters long. Because what happens is, due to the diamond shape, when it's pulled out lengthways, you gain 30%. So in a 4 meter net, or a 3 meter net, you gain an extra meter. So it'll be 4 meters long. This is a 4 meter net, so you gain 1.3 meters. So it'll be 5.3 meters long on the ground. Then when you pull it widthways out into a nice lovely little square / diamond shape, that's then when you get your right size. So if you're out there buying netting by the meter, make sure you buy 1.3 meters of net when it's pulled out like this, because 1.3 meters of net pulled out like this will equal 1 meter of stretched net. Netting, the commercial netting that I use is available in 5, 10, 15 and 20 meter wide lengths. So you can then work out you have one lovely little tree here that you want to cover, and let's assume that it's a full-size tree and it's about 2.5 meters high. So what you're actually going to need to do is you're going to need to buy a 10-meter net, even though the tree's only 2.5 meters high, because you go up 2.5, across 2.5, down 2.5. There's 7.5 meters, and the nearest, and then up 2.5, across 2.5, down 2.5 on the other side. So you're looking at approximately a 3x3 square, which is the size of a gazebo for your net. So you're going to need a 10-meter wide net just to cover one tree. If you have 10 trees, you're going to then need 10 lots of those. But if you have a row of trees side by side, and instead of going up, across, down, up, across, down, up, across, down, if you just go up and straight across the top, suddenly you're taking out the down, the up, the down, the up, all the way along there. So suddenly, out of a 30-meter long net, instead of by 10 meters wide, instead of only covering 3 trees, you can suddenly cover 15 trees. Just because you're not going up, down, up, down. Also, you can space it out to a wider spacing. So a 10-meter wide net will cover 7 meters of ground space, 3 meters high on the side, 5 meters in the middle. So 7 by 20 is 140 square meters of ground space. By the same net, you'd cover 3 trees with. So economically wise, if you're going to try to cover your trees, you can look at then going, well, I only have 2 trees, so it's not economical to cover them with a structure. I have 5, 10, 15 trees that I want to cover. Suddenly, economics, you're going, wow, $80 a pop at the green shed for a 10 by 10 net, and you're going to cover 10 trees, suddenly there's $800 in a net. And that net's only going to last possibly 2 years. So if you go, say it does last 2 years, so in 5 years, that's $4,000 in 10 years, if you get 2 years out of it, if you just go and put that in there. Whereas if you were to invest plus all the time, plus all the effort, plus all the angst, and the environmental cost of using so much net, versus going through and saying, that's it, we're going to design our backyard to have our fruit trees in one area, we're going to cover them up, and we're going to have them, we're going to save time, effort, the environment by covering them with a single piece of net that then lasts ages, because the rest of the structure is 20, 25 years, 30 years plus the lifestyle of it. Yes? The question was about white netting versus black netting, and at night the animals being able to see the white netting versus the black netting. Again, it comes down to, well, I think at night everything's pretty damn dark. I don't think it's an issue myself. If you're, I haven't seen any studies that show a significant correlation between white and black netting. I do know the Big Green Shed, on advice of Wildlife Victoria, don't sell black netting, but I haven't come across any issues when they're pulled tight over a structure of the colour. To me, it only comes down to aesthetics. They're both constructed the same, they're both built the same, they both come with the same UV stabilised in them. So unless it's loosely draped over something, I still personally would think that the animal isn't going to care if it's white or black. I don't know if they're colourblind, I don't know, but I don't know if anyone's actually done the study and put out 3 rows of white net and 3 rows of black net and then counted how many animals are killed on each. Like, it's not really a study that I've come across, but all the anecdotal stuff on the internet says white net is better than black. Some come along and say that it's going to last better and does better for your fruit, but they both provide the same shading. They both cost the same when you compare apples with apples. They both last the same. To me, it comes down to a visual. And so long as the right netting's used in the right spot and used appropriately, I can't see colour being an issue. I just don't see animals sitting in there saying, that one's white, let's avoid that, but oh, what's that? There's some black netting there. I just can't see that, especially at night being an issue. Yes? Yes? The frames are anchored, they're concrete in the ground, so they're your standard sort of building ones, which is 2 foot in the ground, so 600 deep with concrete around them. So they're all nice and secure in there. Now, if you had, obviously as a builder, if you had some poor sandy soil, you'd be going in the ground more, but your minimum is 2 foot in the ground with concrete in it. So a 35 diameter hole, 600 deep with concrete around it. Is there any more questions?
You mentioned plastic netting is recyclable.
Mm-hmm.
Can you tell us practically how you actually recycle it? Do you go to some special recycling facility?
It was a question about recyclability of the net. The net that we have here is it's a high density polyethylene. It's the same style plastic as a lot of your drink bottles and stuff. And from the research that I've done and my understanding, it can go directly into a recycling bin. It is the same style plastic. It's not one of the soft plastics that need to be specially recycled at a special collection centre. It's I don't know the actual number on it, but it's a high density polyethylene. I think it's number 2 with a little triangle on it, and it is directly recyclable along with all your rest of your recyclables in the recycling bin. That's my understanding, and that's what I've been led to believe. Is there any more questions? I kind of summed it up pretty quickly. The question was about the junction between the chicken wire and the bird net. Best thing will be to come out once we've finished here and I can show you on there, because what you actually have is you have a galvanized cable, which is what then the chicken wire is clipped to, and then the bird net actually has a structural length of fencing wire that runs through the edge to provide structural strength to something that's quite weak. It spreads the load over the length of the chicken, over the length of the bird net. And then there is clips, rated clips, which are shown up there, little black clips on there. They then go through both the fencing wire, the cable, and the bird and the chicken wire to clip that all together, so you end up with a really nice junction that then is a nice even space and nothing then can get loose, and there's no issues then with structural strength between those two junctions. I might have finished a little bit early, but that's all right. I'll wrap up. Oh, that's all right. We can.
Does the netting over the structure stretch over time? Does it need to be retightened?
What are the, when it's pulled, the question was about the netting stretching. When it's tensioned properly, the answer is no. There is always the ability, if for some reason, say we have an incredibly high windstorm, or we have some of that rather lovely freaky weather we have through, it is possible to come through and retension it, because the netting is, you can see on the sides, it's all been clipped on the sides. That is where all the tension is then taken up, is along the sides. Those staples can be pulled out, and then the netting can be stretched across and then re-clipped. So if it does need to be re-clipped, it can, but I haven't come across that issue yet in the last 2 years. So. Oh, another question.
Is it easy to go in and get when you want to get your fruit or else do some sticking and stuff? Is it easy to get into and out of without affecting that tension?
Yes, because that's one thing I didn't cover was these structures come with either a sliding door, so a nice big 2 metre wide sliding door that you can fit a bobcat, a tractor, you can fit a ride-on mower through, or if you don't have need for that, you can put a standard pedestrian door on there, so a 90 centimetre size door, so you can get a wheelbarrow in, you can carry all that in there. So on a long structure you might have one at each corner because you don't want to walk all the way down to the end and then walk all the way back and come out. But there is always access doors in these, because otherwise you're going to then have to try and pull things off to get that in there. So you would always have some form of door in there, maybe multiple doors, maybe a big door in the middle here and 2 doors at each end. It just depends on what your paths are there, where you need to get to, what's it built against, and then how that's going to best work for your situation. One more? The question was about building on an L shape. Look, the design as it sits here is best suited to a square, but having said that, I'm currently doing an extension on one which comes out between 2 end poles on an angle to make it into an L shape. So you can angle it. It doesn't exactly work. Now, while the framework in here is very square, not a lot of blocks are square. So if you had a fence on the outside, say your neighbour's fence came in here and this is where we could put it, but you went from hard against your neighbour's fence to about 2 or 3 metres out here, instead of trying to get custom sizes, which gets very costly and very difficult to manufacture, you put in a square and then the netting stretches. So you can make odd shapes by having a square in the middle and then having a fence, then the fence around the outside is then what the net comes down to, because the net's flexible, steel's not. So if you can work in, when you're looking at something, even if it's a weird shape all the way around it, your netting can still come off the sides here, come out to a fence, and then work in. An L shape, you would have one square and then another square, and then you would just probably run 2 straight runs of net over the top to make that all work out that way. That was a little bit shorter than I expected, but thank you everyone for listening. I will be hanging around all weekend and be here for more questions if you want them. So, thank you.